Alright, my friends, we need to talk about Varials. This track, I'll Find the Dark, when this thing dropped, I just could not believe how this mix sounded. These guys are pushing the distortion and the lowness to extremes I haven't heard anywhere else. And to me, it just sounds like an impossible level of distortion. And I say impossible because if you distort too much in front of your amp, you will quickly lose all the life, all the dynamics in the performance and just flatten everything out. So I had to figure out how these guys are getting this sound that's so blown out with distortion, but still somehow very impactful. So here's a quick clip of the original.
Motherfucker!
So I've already laid down the drums here and some samples. I'm using Modern and Massive 2 for the main sound and just a whole bunch of distortion and clipping and hard compression on everything. So that sounds like this. Already it sounds very blown out, but we're going to need that to compete with the ridiculous guitars we're going to lay down. Otherwise, the drums just aren't going to stand out. And when it comes to the guitar tone, it seems to me like they're tuned all the way down to drop F. But they're not just leaving it there at super low drop F. They are pitch shifting that down one whole octave. Which, if you know your tunings, it's like, what were they thinking? Like, why would you do this? It's so low that it's hard to make out the actual note or chord being played, but I'm pretty sure in this main riff, it's a tritone from the F sharp like this. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to get nerdy right away. That low note, that F0, I couldn't believe how low that is. So I Googled what frequency that actually is, and it turns out that's 21.8 hertz. Now, if you know anything about frequency, you know humans can hear from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So when we talk about pushing the limits, this is actually at the limit. If this was any lower, no one would hear the fundamental frequency of the note. That is completely insane, but it's actually the key to the entire sound of this track, which I'll explain in a second. So we have 3 guitar tones here on the left and right, 6 in total, and then 2 bass tracks as well. But before we even get into all that, the main key to this sound, like I said, is that low pitch shifting. Because if you listen to that low note and the distortion on it, do you hear how we're not just getting regular old distortion? We're getting like a helicopter going overhead. That is because this 21 hertz wave, this very slow sound wave, is being distorted. And so 21 times a second, that's what hertz is. We're hearing this wave breaking up. So we're actually hearing every single instance of distortion in this tone. That's crazy. If we played this higher up, it would just sound weird and we don't get that breakup. So that's kind of a simplified version of the whole philosophy behind this sound, but to now dive deeper into each guitar tone, the first one's like a grinding high layer to make sure it sticks out in the mix. The second is more about that bassy low mid-range noise. And a little bit of high end in there as well, but an overall different flavor of tone. And then the third one isn't pitch shifted. This one's more of a standard metal tone and a chug layer to bring back some of that definition we're losing by squeezing everything with distortion in the main tones. You'll see in a minute, but that track's basically going to save this entire mix for us. And obviously, I can't say this is exactly what the band did, but I would be surprised if it wasn't something like this. It sounds more than just double tracked because the guitars are all encompassing, and they've got to be doing something like this chug track to bring back that definition that they're losing by just distorting the crap out of everything. The bass tone's a whole thing as well, but we'll dive deeper on that in a minute. First, let's go into these 3 tones. So the first one here starts with Archetype Gojira, which I'm just using as a pitch shifter. Everything else is turned off. Ridiculous. After that, we have the 3 kilohertz phase distortion, which basically smears the harmonics of a tone, and to me it sounds kind of similar to what a metal zone does. It kind of gives you that grinding chainsaw mid-range. That's an extreme example. I'm going to dial it down more than that, but you get the idea of what that's doing for us. Underrated plugin. To me, that's like a metal zone with a mix knob, which is great. After that, I've got it going into a Big Muff emulation by Audiority. And this is what gives us that helicopter effect. Fuzz is the most aggressive type of distortion because it clips the hell out of the sound wave. So this is what really makes the distortion stick out. And then all of those, the pitch shifter, the phase distortion, and the big muff are going into the SLO 100 binaural. And I'm using this pretty much because it's a very standard and basic high gain amp, which is what we want because we want all of our distortion character to be coming from pedals. We want fuzz, we want metal zone style distortion. So this works well as a blank canvas. We don't want too much like distortion character from the amp itself. And I pretty much left everything as is, nothing going on. So just using the amp. After that, another helicopter trick. I'm saturating after the amp using the Fed DSP Faturator, and this makes it even more spiky, even more like present in your ears. On its own, that sounds worse, but in the mix, we kind of need it to sound bad. We need it to sound so blown out, and that's getting us there. After that, I'm kind of ashamed of myself for this, but I'm using a lot of parallel OTT because there's just no other way around it. If you go this low, you're working with a lifeless rumble of sound that you need to somehow bring alive and, you know, turn into something that's in your face. Hard compression is one of the only ways to get there, so this makes a huge difference. And finally, we just have some EQ shaping it further, and that is the first tone on the left and right. That's the left, let's get it on the right. And we are just getting started here, guys. This is going to get crazy. So the first tone is mostly about the harsh high end that's going to give this energy in the mix. Now coming to the second tone, this is more about the low mid power. And this starts in a similar way. I'm starting with the phase distortion again for that grinding chainsaw sound. And then I'm using the audio assault emulation of the Meshuggah amp because again, it's another very dry sounding high gain amp. That's the kind of thing we want. Handles low tunings better than anything. And in front of that, we have 3 pedals. The Octaver, of course, because we want that. An HM2, for more chainsaw grind. Only very lightly using this, but it's just an insane pedal. And then, of course, a big muff doing the same thing as before. So it's kind of the same starting point as the first tone. And yeah, just to get the point across, if we turn off our HM2 and the phase distortion here, we lose all that chainsaw grind. Whereas if we have those switched on, but we turn off the big muff, we get the chainsaw grind, but we don't have that helicopter thing. So all of them together just sounds insane. I'm using a couple of audio assault cabs. This is like a doom one, which is kind of perfect because this tone has kind of a lot in common with doom metal, you know, those blown out distorted tones. And then I'm following a similar process again, OTT after the amp to tighten everything up. Extreme EQ, really boosting heavily down here, cutting some resonant stuff down at about 150, but then generally just boosting all the low end and low mid range so we get that rumble that we want. And then again, saturating after the amp using decapitator this time just to get it a little more spiky and cutting through, and some fresh air as well. We want some top end in this tone, but this guy here definitely makes it more of a kind of low mid focus. So let's get this tone laid down as well now. Something to remember, and I've talked about this in my videos on Sleep Token and the Thal genre, but the lower that you tune, the more you basically have to do to saturate and distort and harmonically excite the tone for it to actually be listenable, because you're having to compensate for the fact that it's actually a lifeless fart. Like, that's what the note itself is. And this band is the most extreme version of that. They're taking this as low as physics will allow. You could not go lower and still have the fundamental frequency of the note be audible. So that's why we're having to do the most ridiculous amount of saturation saturation and distortion and compression and all of this stuff to bring this to life. These guys could not have pulled off this mix without completely blowing it out with distortion, because you have to bring it to life and you're bringing it from so low down. And regardless of how low you tune, guitar's still a mid-range instrument. You need it to be occupying those frequencies. So you're basically adding as much as you can on top of that fundamental frequency to get it sitting where you need it in the mix. So that's kind of the philosophy with this. When you go low, you have to work harder, and this is the most extreme example of that. So that's our low guitars done, but now we need to go into that chug layer. And this is where we bring back some of those transients that we have completely squashed out of the first two tones with distortion. Like, these really don't have any pick attack left in them. It's very even volume wise. So here we're going to kind of cheat and just... If we get a super tight take of this, it should blend right in with the other two and give the illusion that there is more pick attack without it sounding like a separate track. All right, let's get it on the right. So for this tone, I'm using good old archetype nully because it just chugs beautifully and there's no pitch shifting this time. Just using the 5150 and this overdrive, that's all I've done. And then in front of it, we have Dr. Drive just because it boosts the attack. Free plugin, by the way, and the phase distortion, which again is free, of course. After the amp, I have a free transient shaper, again, just to boost the attack because that's what we want. So this nicely blends with the main tone. That's why we're using the phase distortion to keep it kind of chainsaw sounding. But it emphasizes the attack, and that's exactly what we need. Okay, and last but not least, let's talk about bass. The bass is really what holds this track together, as is usually the case, because right now, it sounds kind of cool. But it also just kind of sounds like noise. The guitars are just noise here. If you go this low, you know, guitars are not built to do this. Bass isn't really, but it's much more capable than a guitar. Like, it's just, there's nothing grounding this. That's what the bass is going to do. So the first thing with the bass is I'm using Dark Glass Ultimate, which was released the day that I'm doing this. I was using Dark Glass Ultra and then this thing dropped amazing. I, of course, have it an octave down. I could have just tuned my bass down, but the string was flapping around a bit and it sounded better doing it this way. If you want to invest in some ridiculously heavy strings, you could get all the way down to F. So I have the cab off. I'm just using this as a distortion pedal going in. And what that's going into is firstly this pedal by Audio Assault, which is insanely aggressive. And that's going into an Audio Assault preamp, which just shapes the tone nicely, and some Audio Assault cabs, using the Faturator after the amp to get that spiky distortion. It sounds worse on its own with that. But again, we need it in the mix. We need to really hear that kind of high harshness, because we basically want to hear each sound wave clipping as aggressively as possible. And that helps. I'm using this in parallel, got the mix halfway, filtering out some top and bottom. And then we have OTT once again, just being ridiculous. And finally, I'm very aggressively shaping it with EQ to get it sitting exactly where I want it. That's our main bass tone. Let's lay it down. Okay, and I'm going to throw that same audio on this second track that we have alongside that. This is going to be like a sub bass track. That's why we've got some low end that we're cutting out in the main one. So for this one, I'm pitching it down again, saturating it, using OTT again just to compress the lows, using R bass to push the lows heavier, and then EQing it, just basically filtering out the top end. And that sounds like an absolute mess. But again, it's about what it does functionally for the mix. That's kind of what everything in this track does, at least in my remake. You know, none of these elements really sound great on their own. The kick sounds horrendous. Snare sounds pretty terrible. Each of these tones sounds bad to me. I mean, except for probably this bass tone. but it really is more about the impact that each of these elements gives to the overall mix. You know, stacking all that distortion together, it really becomes like bigger than the sum of its parts. I've never approached a mix quite like this before. I've never tried to get a sound like this. I've never heard another band doing anything like this. Like, yeah, there's other bands in the scene heading that way, but what Varials are doing right now is just insane. It's completely stupid. Like, we do not need to make mixes like this, but I also love it. It's not heavy metal if there's not some band going lower than anyone else has gone, more distorted than anyone else has gone. Like, I don't know how we take it further than here because we are literally at the limits, but someone's going to do it. Someone's going to find a way to get even lower and even more ridiculously disgusting, and I'm here for it. It's awesome. Like, do we need to do it? No, we're pretty good. Like, we've explored everything, but are we going to do it? Yes, because it's fun. Why not? All right, anyway, I hope this was interesting for you guys. It was definitely a fun experiment for me. So hopefully you picked up some cool tricks along the way. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe for more content like this. And as always, if you want the ultimate guide from me on producing, mixing, and mastering modern metal, you can check out my Modern Metal Pro course in the description. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.